And I see, let's see, we've got 17 people out there in Zoom land. Got 6 here. So that's 23. There's 38 people in class. So that means that 15 of you are hopefully watching this after the fact. I want to just, I've made this kind of comment previously, but I'm going to say it again. And I'm recording it because I'm assuming that there's 15 of you who are watching this. There is a, as I suspected, there's a very strong correlation, inverse correlation, which means that in terms of grades on the exam and attendance in class. And the more, and when I look around this room and the number of people, there are, let me just say, most of the people who did very well on the exam are usually physically in this room with me. Most of the people who did not do well on the exam are usually either online or not online and supposedly watching after the fact. So there is a strong correlation between grades and your physical presence in class. It matters absolutely not at all to me whether you come physically to class or not, okay? If none of you came to class, I would just stay home and lecture from my daughter's old bedroom, right? Which is easier for me because I can basically just roll out of bed and walk across the hallway. That said, you know, it matters a great deal to you, however, right? And the reason is that you, by making the effort at it to physically get up and come to class, puts you in a mindset for learning. Now, maybe some of you can't do that, and there's a good reason for it, right? And so you're online, so that's good. That's better than not being online. The least best, well, the next less best is to watch these lectures after the fact, which I am making available, right? And the least best, and you're not even going to hear this because if it's true, is you're not watching the lecture at all, is probably the least best choice. So, you know, as I suspected, there was a strong correlation between people physically coming into class and scores on the exam, you know, and then being online and scores on the exam, and then not being online or in class at all and scores on the exam. So I will make this other point. You see how I dress for class, right? This is part of my effort to get my head in the right place, right? So the reason I dress like this is not because I like wearing a suit and tie. I freaking hate ties, okay? And I don't really particular on suits either. You know, if you see me around town, because I live here in town, you're gonna see me walking around in jeans and a t-shirt, flip-flops if it's warm enough, right? That's my normal, like, that's what I look like when it's, you know, when I'm just chilling, okay? I don't expect you to dress up for class or anything like that. But it's all about the mindset, right? And so I wear this because it gets me in this mindset of being serious about what I'm doing. I would encourage you to think about whether you can physically come to class, right, as a means of getting you serious about learning. Okay? There's no penalty, there is no attendance for this class. It does not matter to me personally, whether you physically come to class or not. But I would encourage you to think about whether it would be good for you to physically come to class. If you can't physically come to class, then I would highly encourage you to be online at a minimum, right? And do this live, because that will at least get you in some mode of thinking and being online and being present and being fully attentive. And I would discourage you from saying, oh, I will just watch it after the fact because, you know, 8 o'clock is so early. You know, that's a little bit of advice to you. And that is why, like, you know, this is why I dress the way I do, is because it gets me in the right mindset. And as well as I want to project to you that I am serious about what I'm doing for you. Okay, so, all right, enough lecture there. And I would say, That doesn't apply to just my class, because I know most classes have an online option. So I would tell you, to the degree you can, you should discipline yourself to get in the right mindset. We don't stand up here and lecture because, well, I enjoy doing it, but I do it, but I know this stuff, right? I don't have to learn it. I already know it. So it's for you, right? And so I try to set it up to maximize your experience. So all of the assignments I give you have a purpose. They are not because I like grading stuff. I guarantee you, I do not like grading. And so, every time I give you an assignment, whether it's in this class or another class, whether it's in 621 or if you take the other classes I teach, those assignments all have a reason, and they are all a burden on me. Because when I assign you a discussion board, I now have to read 38, posts. You're all fascinating people, but by the time I get to about post number 7, I just want to knock myself on the head. Okay, so it's just, right, this is all about you, not me. So bear that in mind, and think about, what you are trying to get out of this. All right, enough about that. So we're going to wrap up chapter 6 today. So let me switch my camera. My mouse pad is very unresponsive when I'm running Zoom for some reason. There it goes. Still not responding. There we go. All right. So this is where we left off last time. We were talking about direct allocation, right? And we said that the allocation process has 4 steps. You identify the cost pool, right, which is the direct costs of the cost drivers. And then if we're doing allocation, step-down method, we add on the previous cost centers, costs that are being stepped down. So we identify the cost pool. We identify the appropriate driver, and the appropriate driver depends on where you are, whether you're doing direct allocation or whether you're doing step-down allocation, but the driver itself is going to be the same, right? So if it was admin in this case, then it was going to be visits, right? If it was, what was the other one we were doing? Housekeeping or something like that, right? What was it? Okay, housekeeping and square footage, right? We have to figure out we figure out the right driver. So housekeeping, square footage, right? Remember, with direct allocation, we're only going to look for the cost driver quantities. With direct allocation, we're only going to look at the cost centers. When we do step down, we're going to look at all of the departments or all of the activities that come below the department that we are thinking about. So, right, so when we did housekeeping in this case, right, when we did direct, we only looked at the square footage of the supported departments. When we did step down, we looked at the square footage of all the departments below housekeeping. So in this case, that was admin, peds, and internal medicine, as opposed to just peds and internal medicine. Okay. So we got to here, we got the cost pool for admin, in this case with step down, with the direct cost of admin, which was 100,000, plus the amount stepped down from housekeeping to admin, which was 45. We then said, all right, what's the cost driver? Well, for admin, we said it was going to be the number of visits, so we added up the number of visits. That became the cost driver. We divide the cost pool by the cost driver to get the allocation rate, which in this case was 523. When we did the direct version, it was only 5, right? And so that increases the amount of admin, the dollar amount for admin. And so departments, and I think this is where we kind of left off because I did this quickly at the end. We then had the allocation rate, And then we calculate the allocation amount, right, to each of the supported departments. And in this case, now we had 523 going to each of the departments based on the number of visits that they had. And notice what happens. Because admin is more expensive now, it makes housekeeping relatively less expensive. And so departments that have a heavy reliance on the admin section wind up paying a larger percentage of the overhead support for the organization. So some money is shifted, right, to PEDS and away from internal medicine. So let's look at that for a second. So this was our allocations for housekeeping for our exercise. So let's do this real quick. We're going to sum this together and we'll see the difference. So PEDS, total cost is going to be its direct cost plus its housekeeping plus its admin, right? And so we had, for PEDS, direct costs of 500. It got 27,273 for housekeeping. And it got 62,745 for admin. Internal medicine, total cost is equal to its direct cost plus its housekeeping plus its admin. And it gets direct cost of 600. Plus its share of housekeeping, which we said is 18,182. Plus its share of admin, which we said was 41,830. So if we now add those up, what has them go up here? I have these wrong. My notes are wrong. I flipped the numbers. So with PEDS, it's 500 plus 27,273 plus 62,745. We get 590,18. For internal medicine, it is 600 plus 18,182 plus 41,830 gives us 660,012. Right? So there's going to be some rounding here, rounding errors here because we're being kind of rough with it. But what we can see is there's the difference is from what we got before. Let's see if I've got it handy. Our original decisions under direct gave PEDS 580 and internal medicine 670. So there's about a $10,000 shift, right? $10,000 goes from internal medicine at 670, it goes down to 660, and it shifts up to PEDS, right? Under step down. So step down, right? So this was our direct calculation. We said PEDS should cost 580 and internal medicine should cost 670. What happened? Well, PEDS winds up picking up more of the housekeeping and more of the admin than I have that wrong? 30. Hold on, 1 second. Something is not right here. Bear with me 1 second. 12,000 square feet. Yeah. We say. Did I have my numbers reversed here? I have my numbers reversed, don't I? I have.
Yeah, can I offer a solution? So when we were doing the step down method, when we were finding the allocation amount, you mixed up the two numbers that were for pediatrics and internal medicine. So when we multiplied the 9.09 value, we should have multiplied for pediatrics it by 2,000, and I think you multiplied it by 3,000, which just reversed it.
Yeah, I think I flipped the housekeeping numbers, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so it should be 27,273 here.
Yes.
Right? Because internal medicine is bigger than pediatrics, and this should be 18,182. All right, so let me just fix that. Sorry. I knew I did something wrong at the end of last class, but I couldn't remember what it was. All right. So now let's refix that. 600,000 plus 27,273 plus 41,830 gives us 669. These are very close. 103. I need to come up with a better example because this is too close. And 500 plus 18,182 plus 62,745, 580, 927. So there's really a small change here, right? So the original was 580. We're really transferring $1,000 roughly from internal medicine to pediatrics. Okay, so I need to make a more stark example for you guys. But so what this does is it allows us to more accurately calculate the cost of pediatrics. So then we would take that 580 divided by 12,000 and this 669 divided by, what do we say, 8,000, and we would get a per visit cost, and it would be 4841 and 669,103 divided by 8,000, 8364, right? So we have a small change as a result of our allocation method, but it can be much more significant than that. I will rewrite this example so that it is. Okay, so sorry about the switch. Just, I think that demonstrates it's easy to, with all these numbers floating around, you really want to be careful with your calculations. Okay, I have another example that I thought that we can do. So I'm going to add a layer of complexity to our calculations. We're going to add a third department now. So we have our department is going to have HR, housekeeping, and finance this time. So these will be our, well, let me see. And then we have inpatient services and outpatient services. Their direct costs are going to be 100,000, 200,000. Finance is 90,000. Inpatient is going to be 1 million, and outpatient is going to be 1.5 million. Number of employees, HR is going to have 5, housekeeping is going to have 10, finance is going to have 3, inpatient is going to have 30, and outpatient is going to have 40. These are like totally made up numbers. Square foot is going to be 500, 800, 500, 15,000, and 10,000. and then revenue, no revenue, no revenue, no revenue, 1.5 million and 2.2 million. I think I took this example exactly out of the book. All right. We're going to, well, let's discuss for a second. Which of these are cost centers, and which of these are profit centers? And how do you know? Callie.
The top of HR, housekeeping, and finance.
Exactly. So Ali said the top three are our cost centers because they have direct costs, but they have no revenue. So that makes them a cost center. The bottom two have costs and revenues. So that's those are profit centers. So you could look at, if you were looking only at the direct costs, which is something I was teaching the physicians last night, and I said, you know, when you guys make an argument for a project or something like that, it is common that people forget they only look at the direct costs of their organization. They're like, oh, hey, you know, I could expand my service because I have to hire these two people and I have to buy these supplies and here's the cost, and look at all the, you know, the revenue I'll bring in. And so they'll basically say something like, well, I have 1.5 million in revenue and 1 million in expenses, so my profit is 500,000, which is not accurate, right? Because this inpatient operation doesn't run without all this support. And so when you're trying to figure out the actual profit coming off the inpatient side, right, you have to allocate some share of this stuff up here down to inpatient. That gives you the fully loaded cost for inpatient, right? Inpatient can't function for any extended period of time without the support of these three sections. And so inpatient has to pay for these because these sections don't bring any revenue, right? They are supporting this. And the reason that they are separate is because it makes sense to put together inpatient and outpatient in one organization and have HR, housekeeping, and finance separated and above them, right? So what would be a logical driver for HR? Well, from the choices we have, what would you choose to be a cost driver for HR and why? HR is human resources, right? So they do things like they hire people, they do their payroll, they fire them, you know, with the manager, they fire them, they provide the benefits and all that. So what would drive HR cost in your mind?
Can I ask a question real quick?
Is somebody online?
Yeah, thank you. Is there a method or like a reason why we do HR first, housekeeping second, finance third? Or like, could you change them? And I guess what's the reasoning? Yeah,
so Caitlin, the reasoning, so the order should be, you should have some logic for the order. And the idea, so under direct, it doesn't matter because the order doesn't matter. Under step down or reciprocal, well, reciprocal, again, the order wouldn't matter. So it's only under step down that the order matters. So under step down, what you're looking for is who provides, you know, which way does the support primarily flow? Is housekeeping, so should we put housekeeping ahead of HR or HR ahead of housekeeping? And so the question would be, does housekeeping provide more support to HR or does HR provide more support to housekeeping? You know, and this is really kind of a judgment call. There is no like mechanical answer here. You could, it is a judgment call, right? The idea is to try to figure out what's the most fair way to do it. So there's a couple of questions. One is, which is the most fair way to do it? Two is there a way, as we allocate these costs, is there a way for the managers to because this process, we want to incentivize the managers to try to reduce costs, right? One of the things that we're always looking for managers to do is to reduce costs. So if a manager could say, if we could say to a manager, hey, we're going to assign you, so the answer in this case probably would be number of employees. That's probably the most logical way to allocate HR costs. You could argue, well, we'll just allocate it based on the number of departments, right? Everybody's going to get an even cut of HR costs. And so if we're doing direct, we just say, well, there's an inpatient and an outpatient. So we'll just cut it and we'll just split the HR costs in half and give each of them $50,000. That would be one way to do it, right? But if you did that, the inpatient people will be like, wait a minute, I have 25% less people than the outpatient side does. And you're charging me the same amount as the outpatient side. That's not fair, right? So the manager would be like, that's not fair because HR does more work for outpatient than it does for us. And so outpatient should pay more, right? That would be, and that's the argument that your managers are going to come back to you. If you're in this position of trying to make these kind of decisions, the manager is going to come back to you and argue that case like, hey, I shouldn't be getting that amount of cost. And the reason that the manager is going to come back and argue that is because the manager has the P&L responsibility. We talked about this in prior chapter, right? They have the profit and loss responsibility for their department, and chances are their bonuses are tied to how much profit they make, right? And so they have a very strong incentive to try to find ways to reduce their costs. And if one of the ways that they can reduce costs is to convince you to assign them less cost, then they have a very strong incentive to come bang on your door and say, that's not fair. And trust me, they will, right? So what we're trying to do is look for a way to fairly allocate costs. And then on top of that, now that the HR manager knows, hey, you know what? The amount of money that we give you from HR is going to be tied to the number of employees you have. So not only do you have to pay the employee cost, the direct cost of your employees out of your profits, but you have to pay HR support out of your profits. That encourages them to look harder at, do I really need 30 employees to do my business? Or can I get away with 29? Maybe 28, right? So what we're trying to do, as kind of senior managers with this process is incentivize our managers, the ones that are working below us, to think about, how do I go about reducing costs so that I can increase profit? And the strong incentive that we provide them is, oh, by the way, you get a bonus based on how profitable you are. And so that incentivize, this is a lot of this is about incentivizing the managers to do the things we want them to do. So that's a long way of answering, Caitlin, that there isn't a programmatic or like technical way to decide this, where it's just right. It is kind of there's an art to it. And I'll be honest, order is somewhat arbitrary here, but I think it makes some sense. HR is going to provide support to everybody, right? Because everybody has to get payroll, everybody has to hire their people, so forth. Housekeeping, and then I would say HR is relatively small. It's got one of the smallest square footage, right? So we got 500 square feet, so it's relatively small. So you could say, well, relatively speaking, HR is probably providing more support to housekeeping and finance and inpatient and outpatient than, say, housekeeping is to HR, than, say, finance, and certainly than finance is to HR, if we're looking at finance as primarily writing bills, right? Because HR doesn't make any bills, nor does housekeeping. So that's there's some logic there. But there isn't a right answer. Okay.
Thank you.
So my question was starting to, I think, Linnea, right? Number of employees, good. So number of employees, as Linnea said, would probably be the best choice. Again, because you could say, well, we're just going to salami slice it. We're going to, we've got two departments, so we'll divide it by 2. So HR probably. The best driver for HR would be number of employees, right? Square footage wouldn't make any sense. There's no connection between square footage and number of employees, right? And then revenues, doesn't really make a whole lot of sense either. Housekeeping, again, we could say, well, we'll just divide it up by the number of departments. That's one option. That also doesn't make a whole lot of sense. We don't have a number of visits this time, so we can't really tie housekeeping to number of visits. And then on top of that, if we were going to do step down, we wouldn't have a mechanism for assigning housekeeping expenses to finance if we used visits, because they wouldn't have any visits. So we're probably going to use square footage, and so that's what we'll go with here, right? And the two most common drivers for housekeeping in the real world are square footage is kind of the default one, even though it's not as accurate, and hours of housekeeping, right? So a more sophisticated organization might have, as the housekeeper walks into a department, they have to swipe to go in, and then they swipe when they leave, that kind of thing. That would allow you to capture, or they might have to fill out reports. Bear in mind your housekeeping staff, as important as they are, tend to be kind of your lower, less educated staff. So it's going to be a little harder to keep track, have them filling out reports and stuff. And plus you're wasting their time. So a lot of times, you're going to have a square footage measure as your default. And then finance. Since we don't have a measure of number of visits, then we'll just do total revenue as the driver. So when we do this for exam purposes, right, you can assume the order that I have this written out, right, the order of the cost centers, you can assume is going to be the order of step down when we do step down method. Okay? And I will tell you that on the exam as well. Yes. Why is finance revenue? So we would think about what are the functions of finance, right? And so some of the functions of finance would include financial reporting, right? What we did in chapters 3 and 4, like writing out the organizational financial reports. It would be paying for all of the bill, right? Writing checks for all the bills for the organization. So supplies coming in, paying the utility bills, all that kind of stuff. And then it would be actually sending out bills and collecting the revenues for the organization. So a big part of the financial function in a healthcare organization is revenue cycle management. There's actually more people employed in revenue cycle management within the overall finance division than anything else. So revenue is a major driver of cost for finance because there are so many people involved in the process. It's kind of interesting. The people who, if you go to like if you talk at Wentworth Douglas, the people who do check-in are technically part of the revenue cycle process, right? So the VP of revenue cycle owns the front desk people because that's where the billing process actually starts. It's not, oh, the doctor's seen, they send the bill over to, they send the medical record over to coding to be coded, which they do. But in reality, where does revenue cycle really start? It's the moment you walk in to the clinic and they say, hi, welcome, can we have your insurance card, please? That's the beginning of the revenue cycle process, right? And even, maybe you could even make an argument that scheduling and so forth, even further back, is really part of the revenue cycle process. So that's why we would choose revenue first, even though what doesn't have a value. I'm not following you. Even though what doesn't.
There's no value for revenue in this example. That's
For finance.
Yeah.
So finance doesn't generate any revenue because it doesn't generate any bills, but it is going to be, its cost is going to be distributed based on revenues in the organization. So when we go that will be their driver. So we'll have $90,000 in cost that we have to allocate out. And what we'll do under direct is we will add together, we'll have $90,000 and we will divide it by 1.5 plus 2.2 million to come up with a, right, because finance doesn't generate any revenue. So it's not, right. So the driver for finance is the revenues generated by the profit centers. Okay. So let's do this under direct then. I'm going to give you a second. Do the 4 steps for HR. So we're going to do direct method, not step down. Do the 4 steps for HR. Cost pool, cost driver, allocation rate, and allocation amount, and do it and get down to how much HR expense is going to go to inpatient and how much is going to go to outpatient. Direct method. Just do HR for now. Keep going. Sorry? Yep. HR. So we're doing direct. All right, so let's give you some time. All right, so step 1, cost pool. What is the cost pool? And we're doing direct method, right? So under cost pool, what is the cost pool for HR? It's 100,000, right? It's their direct costs. And even if we were doing step down, the first cost center that gets allocated doesn't have anything else stepped down into it. So the cost pool, even under step down, is just a direct cost for the first, but we are doing direct method right now. So the cost pool is $100,000, right? We said we next want to get the cost driver, and we said that for housekeeping, oh shoot, I said housekeeping, didn't I? I meant HR. That's okay. I'm mixing them up. So the cost pool for a housekeep, did I say housekeeping or HR? I did say HR? All right, all right, so HR, 100,000. The cost driver for HR, we said, was number of employees. So what number of employees are we going to use under the direct method? Linnea, I can't hear you. The total number of employees, so 40 plus 30 plus 3 plus 10 plus 5? No. 30 plus 40, just the profit centers. Under direct method, we're going to just look at the drivers from the profit centers. Okay, so for HR, we said that the driver is number of employees, so 30 plus 40, 70. So the allocation rate, right, is 100,000 divided by 70, which is equal to 1429 roughly per employee, right? Now the allocation amount, right, for inpatient is going to be 1429 per employee times 30 employees. And for outpatient, it's going to be 1429 per employee times 40. So for inpatient, that's 42,870. For outpatient, that's 57,160. Did everybody get there? Or if you didn't get there, do you understand now? Saffron's got it? Okay, good. Okay, so that's HR, right? And so for direct method, if we continue with direct method, and we want to do now housekeeping, right? Let's go ahead and do that. So go ahead and get that started. What is your cost pool, your cost driver, allocation rate, and allocation amount? So I'll give you a minute to work on that. So remember, we're doing direct method. What is the cost pool for housekeeping? 200,000, right? Under direct method, the cost pool for each of the cost centers is going to just be their direct costs. So it's really simple. Under direct method, you just have to remember, am I doing direct method or am I doing step down, right? Direct method is really pretty straightforward. It's quite direct, right? So cost pool is just the direct cost, 200,000. We said the cost driver for housekeeping is going to be square footage. So what square footage are we going to use? Total of the profit centers, which was 25,000, right? Okay, good. So we're going to use just the profit centers, right? Direct method, whenever we look for our cost drivers, we just go to the profit centers. And so in this case, the total square footage for our profit centers is 15 plus 10 is 25,000. So the cost driver is 25,000 square feet. We divide cost pool by cost driver. 200,000 divided by 25,000 is $8 per square foot, right? And now we can translate that into allocated costs to each of our departments. So inpatient gets $8 per square foot times 15,000 square feet, and outpatient gets $8 per square foot times 10,000 square feet. And so 8 times 15 is 120,000. And 8 times 10,000, of course, is 80,000. One way to quick check this is add those two things together. Do they add back up to my cost pool? 80 plus 120 is equal to 200. So yay, I'm good, right? All right. Finance. These numbers are going to be a little not funky. They're going to be tiny. So, same 4 steps, right? Cost pool, cost driver, allocation rate. This is very straightforward. Once you know the steps, it's always the same 4 steps. The issue is what is my cost pool and what is my cost driver? Those get a little more, but the steps are actually the same. So you just got to remember, in order to answer that, what's my cost pool, what's my cost driver, you have to know, am I doing direct or am I doing step down? Just to keep going, right? Cost pool, cost driver, allocation rate, allocation amount, inpatient, outpatient. So the cost pool for finance is $90,000. Somebody out in Zoom land is just barely staying awake. All right, so the cost driver for finance, we said, is going to be revenue. So what is our driver? What is the driver amount? 3.7 million, right? It's going to be the sum of the total of the profit centers, right? So the driver under direct is always the sum of the drivers from the profit centers. So if I ask you something like, hey, calculate the allocation amount for finance to outpatient, you don't want to just grab the outpatient number because you'll wind up allocating the whole amount. You've got to grab the total. So in this case, that's going to be $3.7 million. So this is a little funky because I've got dollars and dollars. So I've got dollars of finance per dollar of revenue, right? So it's a little bit weird because of that. So then my allocation rate is 90 divided by 3.7, 3,700. 90 divided by 3,700 gives me 0.02432. When you wind up with just FYI, the more you round, the more wrong you're going to be, right? Your allocation amount. And I will not take points off if you use 0.024, but you're going to wind up, because you're going to be multiplying such a small number by such a big number, if you use 0.024 versus say 0.02432, you're going to wind up with a pretty significant difference. So we take that 0.02432, and we're now going to say, okay, that is dollars of finance cost, right, per dollar of revenue. Times, so inpatient gets 1.5 million. Right, and then, what did I do, 0.02432, yeah, so if you do 0.02, you're gonna have a really different number. Revenue times 2.2 million. If you wrote that and did this on the exam, I wouldn't take any points off, but your number would be kind of funky, right? So I'll just take the actual here and do 1,500. And I get 36,486, and then 90 divided by 3,700 times 2,200. Oops. Oh, keep going. There we go. 53,513, right? If I add those two things together, 36 plus 53 is 89, and then some change over here. So it's close enough to say it's about 90,000. So I'm on. Okay, so we've now allocated the 3 sections to our departments, and we could total that up and say, okay, what's the total cost for inpatient? HR, housekeeping, finance. So inpatient, outpatient. So the direct cost for inpatient and outpatient was 1 million and 1.5 million. We said that for inpatient, they're going to get, for HR, they're going to get 42,870. And outpatient's going to get 57,160. For housekeeping, inpatient's going to get 120, and outpatient's going to get 80. And then finance, our last one, we had up here, we're going to do inpatient gets 36,486, and outpatient gets 53,513. If we add those total together, we get total cost, right? And I think I've got that pre-added. So we wind up with 1 million, roughly 199,356, and 1,600,000 and 90,673, right? So that's our total cost. So the actual cost of doing outpatient visit, or well, not visits, but admissions is not $1 million, right? It's actually almost $1.2 million, right? So when we said initially, oh, hey, you know what? We make 1.5, our cost is $1 million, we make $500,000 in profit, is not accurate. A more accurate number is to say we make 1.5 million and our actual costs are roughly 1.2 million. So our profit on the inpatient side is 300,000. And then same thing here, we made 2.2 million. Oh, our profit must be 2.2 minus 1.5 or 700. No, it's actually 2.2 minus roughly 1.7, which is about $500,000 in profit. So that's important to remember all that. Right, so that it gives us, that's our slightly more complicated direct method example. So now let's do step down. We got time, 20 minutes, so we should be able to do this. All right. Now we're going to do step down. Same problem. And this is how I will likely do this on the exam for you, okay? I will give you one example like this, laid out like this, and I will say something like, use direct method to tell me how much finance cost gets allocated to inpatient. Then I will tell you, use step down to tell me how much finance gets allocated to inpatient, right? That would be how I would ask it on the exam, because I don't really want you to do the whole thing. I just want you to show me that you actually understand. The challenge there, though, is if you're going to do step down for finance, right, it's the third thing down, so you're going to have to do most of the process. Yep. Sorry? I will give you the drivers. That will not be a, like, I could, a valid question on the exam would be something like, and I've done this before, something like, you have to allocate housekeeping. Two potential drivers you are considering are square footage or number of hours. Which would you recommend? What are the pros and cons of using each of these, and which would you recommend, right? And so you would say, okay, with housekeeping, the two methods you're telling me, so with number of hours it's more accurate, but it costs more because somebody has to keep track of the hours. But with square footage, it's one and done. You measure the space and then you're done. You don't have to ever do it again. But it's less accurate, right? Because if you have, say, an ED with 5,000 square feet and a radiology with 5,000 square feet, there is nowhere near the same level of housekeeping requirements between an ED and an imaging center with the same square footage. ED is way messier, takes way more support. So if you split them, that wouldn't be fair. But for a question like this, I will give you everything you need to know, the order, the drivers, and everything. So I won't try to trick you with that. In the real world, you'll have to make those decisions. Okay, so let's start doing step down. Let's start with our first category of cost, which is going to be HR. Cost driver, allocation rate, allocation amount. Same as every time. So go ahead and get started on do HR. I'll give you a minute. And remember, the driver is different this time. Step down is different. Okay, keep going. So same 4-step method, right? Step 1, cost pool. Step 2, cost driver. Step 3, allocation rate. Step 4, allocation amount. HR is our first cost center to be allocated. So what's its cost pool? Still just 100,000, right? Valerie said just 100,000. It's just its direct cost because there's nothing else being added yet. What is the cost driver though? That's going to be a little bit different this time. $83, good. So the answer to what's the cost driver is when you do step down method, you're going to look at the drivers for everything below the line you're currently working. So you're going to count, so we said HR is number of employees. So under direct, we would only count the number of employees in the profit center. Under step down, we're going to look at all of the employees below HR. So we're not going to include HR, right? Because we're trying to clear HR's costs. We're not going to include HR's numbers in there, but we are going to include everybody below HR. So that's going to be 10 plus 3 is 13, plus 30 is 43, plus 40 is 83. So the cost driver is 83 employees. So the allocation rate is the same as before, 100,000 divided by 83, and that gives us about 1204 per employee. Okay, allocation amounts. Well, this time we can't just do inpatient and outpatient, right? We have to figure out, because in the next round, when we go to do housekeeping, we're going to need to know under step down, what do we need to know? To get their cost pool, we need to know what for housekeeping? We need to know how much HR cost is going to go into housekeeping before we can get their cost pool. So to do that, then we need to get the allocation amount for housekeeping, for finance, for inpatient, and for outpatient. Right? IP and OP are common abbreviations for inpatient and outpatient. So housekeeping is going to get $1204 per employee times the number of employees. Housekeeping has 10 employees. So they're going to get $12,040 in housekeeping expenses. Finance gets $1204 times 3 employees, which is going to be $3612. Inpatient gets $1204 times 30. And I can't do that in my head, so, and outpatient gets $1204 times 40. And those numbers are 36, oh, that makes sense, 36,120, 10 times as much as that, and 48,160. Okay. So now we know how much HR is being allocated to housekeeping and how much is being allocated to finance. So we need to hang on to those numbers, right, in order to do this. Okay, so we have now cleared housekeeping. We've allocated out its $100,000. We've now cleared housekeeping, so we're going to move on to sorry, I keep mixing up HR and housekeeping. We've now cleared HR. We're going to move on to housekeeping. Housekeeping, so we need to cost pool, cost driver, allocation rate, allocation amount. So what is the cost pool for housekeeping? Somebody in Zoom land, shout it out. What is the cost pool for housekeeping under step down?
200,000.
Plus the 1204.
How much?
It's 200,000 plus the 12,000 from what we got from HR.
Exactly. It's the 200,000 plus the step down from HR. So it's the direct cost plus 12,040 in HR costs. So it's 212,040. Okay. What is the cost driver for housekeeping under step down? Well, the driver conceptually is still square footage. How many square feet? No.
Is it 25,500?
25,500. You're taking all the drivers below the line you're currently working on. Did you add 5,000 instead of 500? Don't add zeros. That'll get you wrong. So 500 plus 15,000 is 15,500 plus 10,000 is 25,500. Right? So the cost driver is 25,500 square feet. And so to get the allocation rate, we divide 212 by 25,500, and that gives us 832 roughly per square foot. Okay. We'll get about 9 minutes, so let's speed this up. All right, so allocation rate. We care now about, we don't care about housekeeping anymore. We need finance, inpatient, and outpatient. So finance, inpatient, outpatient. Finance gets 832 per square foot times 500 square feet. Inpatient gets 832 times 15,000. And outpatient gets 832 times 10,000. So 832 times 500 is, I don't have it written down. Two times 500 is 4160. Inpatient gets 15,000 times 8.32 is 124,800. And here we're going to be rounding. And then 8.32 times 10,000. Oh, well, 83,200 roughly. I'll have to use a calculator to do that. Okay, so we've now allocated HR, we've allocated housekeeping, now we need to allocate finance. So the cost pool for finance, and I'm just going to kind of start doing it. The cost pool for finance is its direct costs, right, the 90,000, plus its share of HR, which we said was 3612, plus its share of housekeeping, right, here's the 3612 from before, plus its share of housekeeping, which we said was 4160, gives us a total cost pool for finance of 97,770. $97,770. Okay, so that's our cost pool. Our cost driver for finance, we said was revenue. Well, now we're down to here, right? So there's nothing left at this point except for the profit centers. And so we can, and luckily that works out because the drivers for finance are just here. So you would make that work out. 2.7 million. And so the allocation rate is 97,770 divided by 2.7 million.
Shouldn't it be
3.7 million.
3.7?
Thank you. By 3.7 million. And that works out to roughly 0.0264, right? Because 97.7 divided by 3.7 is 0.0264, 2342, right? So you're going to have some error here when you start to allocate. So the allocation amount, inpatient, is going to be 0.0264 times 1.5 million, right? Gives me 39,636. Outpatient is going to be 2.2 million. Gives me 58,134. All right, so we have now allocated all three of our cost centers. So we want to find out what's the fully loaded cost for each of our departments. So we'd say inpatient fully loaded cost is going to be its direct cost of 1 million. Now let me do it that way. Direct cost, HR, housekeeping, finance, total, right? We have inpatient, outpatient. So direct costs are still 1 million and 1.5 million. Our HR costs were 36,120 and 48,160. Our housekeeping costs were 124,800 and 83,200. And our finance costs were 39,636 and 58,134. If we add those up, we get 1,200,520 roughly, and 1,689,440. So they're gonna be roughly, it's pretty close to what we had before. If you add up these, all this support, it's gonna equal about 390,000, which is the total of the cost centers, right, that we had to allocate to begin with, right? So all these, this is $390,000 worth of support costs that we had to allocate to these two departments. So if you add up the allocations, it's still gonna come out to 390, but the allocation is just a little bit different as a result of our process. So we're only on, it's only about, you know, again, it's about $1,000 shift, but $1,000 is nothing, not nothing, depending on, you know, how your bonus arrangements work. So this was our direct, this is our step down. Okay, that's chapter 6. 2 methods, right? 2 methods of allocation. So you have to remember the key thing to remember, the key thing to remember is the 4 steps, right? Cost pool, cost driver, allocation rate, so cost pool, cost driver, allocation rate, allocation amount. Then you have to remember, which method am I using? Am I using direct method, in which case the drivers all come from just the profit centers, or am I using my step down method, in which case I have to pay attention to order, and I always take the drivers, all of the drivers below the line I am currently working, right? So it was, HR was first, so that would have, we used housekeeping, finance, inpatient, and outpatient. Then we did housekeeping, and we said, okay, that's finance, inpatient, outpatient. Then we did finance, and we said just inpatient and outpatient. That's it, right? It's pretty simple, and it's pretty mechanical, but you have to be able to flow through the process. All right, yay, we're done. So we'll see you next Tuesday. Have a great weekend, and be safe out there.
Can I ask you a quick question?
Yes.
So when we're doing the step